It's been over 3 months since we last got a new look at Breath of the Wild sequel, and it looks like we may have to wait a bit longer before we get any more information on it. But with Nintendo's latest trailer of the game, which was revealed at E3, we got a much better concept of what the game may end up looking like. Especially when compared beforehand, having only seen the first teaser trailer way back in E3 2019. So it was a solid 2 years before we got any more information on the game. But luckily, since the game is set to come out next year, we don't have to expect that long of a drought again. But with the first trailer Nintendo showed us way back, it gave us a much more darker and eerie vibe of Link and Zelda exploring underneath Hyrule Castle and finding Ganondorf's corpse, making it seem like they were going for a far darker direction with the sequel. Though once we finally got to see that second trailer, we got much more insight on how this game will actually end up looking. Yeah, talk about a huge shift in expectations between the two trailers. Instead of the dark depths of the underworld, we are going to the bright skies of the overworld. But who knows, maybe the game will find a way to incorporate both. Having you play out what was shown in the first trailer, even if it's just for the prologue, before Link awakens back on the surface with his newfound powers in his arms and must reunite with Zelda once again. Regardless, we can be assured that this game will continue to add to the already existing Hyrule we've seen in the prequel, but with much more depth, vertically, whether in the sky or underground. Breath of the Wild redefined open-world games with the ability to truly explore what you saw. They took no shortcuts in creating Hyrule this time around. The geography behind its world is truly remarkable. The entire map is connected with no loading screens, a day and night cycle that even affects the NPCs as they go about their day and go to sleep when night falls, all seamlessly making Hyrule come to life like no other game in the series. The build-up it takes to reach places like Death Mountain and Zora's Domain now feel real in scale, as you have to trek through so much land in order to reach it. Unlike previous titles where there had to be loading screens in between the provinces that would magically change the game's environment just by entering it. Instead, the world is connected like no other. It's made Breath of the Wild's exploration of Hyrule the best part about playing the game. Hyrule itself was fleshed out, with no corners cut. No unclimbable walls that close off an area, or anything to take away from your immersion when exploring. This seemed like it was Nintendo's first time to fully realize Hyrule the way they wanted to, with no restrictions, giving the player the ability to access and explore every nook and cranny the world had to offer. And you could explore all of that the way you wanted to, as the game was open to you right after the Great Plateau, allowing you true freedom like never before. From even being able to take on the final boss the second you start your adventure. Or if you chose to power yourself up and explore each and every shrine beforehand, or even just mess around throughout the many fun things you can do throughout its world. They put dungeons aside and made the main goal to explore the world for what it is. A world that has been reimagined again and again from title to title, but in Breath of the Wild has finally become a living, breathing world unlike any other. It's honestly hard to compare this game to any other in the series when it comes to its world, as it's never been as well established until Breath of the Wild. So, with Breath of the Wild 2 still taking place in Hyrule, and now Link having access to even above the clouds, this game is looking to be twice as massive as even Breath of the Wild was. While Breath of the Wild had the Sheikah Towers and the many mountains that brought you really high above ground, Breath of the Wild 2 seems to take you a step way higher than that. It almost looks similar to how Skyward Sword carried out its open world, with a huge world above the clouds and another one beneath. But unlike Skyward Sword, which separated the two with loading screens, really taking away from the immersion of it being one massive world, Breath of the Wild 2 will most likely get rid of any loading screens throughout the overworld, creating for seamless exploration between the sky and ground. So I think Breath of the Wild 2 will be Nintendo's chance to give us the vision they had with Skyward Sword, with being able to explore the ground and sky in a completely new way. But with the concept of Nintendo adding more to Hyrule just in the air, it will add much more depth in exploration, but just vertically. As I think we can all agree that Breath of the Wild's Hyrule is big enough for an overworld, but I can't deny that the game has lacking things to do throughout its insane scale. Outside the many shrines and the way too many Korok seeds, the game's world is barren for the most part. Hyrule seemed to really lack any secrets hidden away or secret areas altogether. From the general lack of caves to not even being able to swim underwater, even when given a Zora tunic. Interestingly, Breath of the Wild was the first 3D Zelda game not to have underwater travel even when given the Zora tunic, with the exceptions of only the Wind Waker being the other 3D Zelda game that didn't allow Link to swim underwater, as the entire game's world was the ocean, so it made a bit more sense to have that. But with how massive Breath of the Wild ended up being, it seemed like Nintendo was mainly focusing on the surface without really caring about underneath. But hopefully with the sequel, they can maybe add to it. But with the idea of fans now being able to revisit this world once again, I can only expect that Nintendo will add more detail to these previous areas that lacked throughout Hyrule. And with the fact that we can see Hyrule Castle rise into the sky within this sequel, we can expect some sort of underground exploration, even if just in Center Hyrule. So with these two concepts further explored on with greater detail, Hyrule could be even more fleshed out than it already is. But while we can't really be sure on any of those changes to actually come to the sequel, we are certain that we're getting much more to explore, but in the sky. From the giant floating islands to discover, to just seeing Link glide above the clouds, it looks like Nintendo has elevated the open world travel to another level. And while we only see Link use a paraglider to soar the sky, or just dive down like he would in Skyward Sword, I would love to see Nintendo add other ways of traversing this great sky. With Breath of the Wild having so many different mounts Link can choose to travel with, and even a futuristic motorbike, imagine Nintendo exploring similar possibilities now with the sky. Maybe even reintroducing Loftwings again. Reuniting the hero spirit with a Crimson Bird, similar to how you can reunite Link with Epona through an amiibo. Hell, we even have the perfect amiibo to summon a Loftwing already, that being the Zelda amiibo. But actually, hopefully Nintendo doesn't limit so many collectibles behind the amiibo like they did with the original game. Regardless, with Link returning to the sky, we will most likely get some connection to Skyward Sword in some way. With the possibilities of maybe Link returning to the remains of Skyloft, which could be located right above the clouds of the Forgotten Temple, which presumably is where the sealed grounds most likely laid, before the goddess statue fell from Skyloft in Skyward Sword's era. So what if the few who remained on Skyloft still have their kin residing on it? Because while we knew that Link and Zelda started Hyrule Kingdom on the surface at the end of Skyward Sword, we aren't really certain that everyone followed them. So imagine an ancient lost civilization of the people of Skyloft still high above the clouds. And while Skyward Sword has tons of connections to the sky that may make an appearance in Breath of the Wild 2, it wasn't the only Zelda game. For example, in Twilight Princess, Link had to use a special cannon that would help launch him above the clouds to reach the city in the sky. The city in the sky was known to be in the heavens, similar to how Skyloft was described. It housed an unknown tribe known as the Oku. They were like a weird bird-man-like hybrid that weren't that pleasant on the eyes. But maybe in Breath of the Wild 2 we can figure out what happened to their kind. And maybe if they have any connections to what happened to the people in Skyloft. And outside the places we could find, maybe Link returning to the sky could bring him closer to the very first hero of Hyrule, and how it all started in the sky. What if the secret to recovering the spirit that has been resting in the Master Sword since the end of Skyward Sword's era could be held in the sky? As it has been heard by both Zelda and even Link when repowering the Master Sword within the Master Trials. So it seems that Nintendo wants to bring back Fi by referencing her in Breath of the Wild, and with Skyward Sword HD recently released, fans really have no excuse not to know the spirit that resides within the Master Sword. Personally, I would love to see a return in Fi, as Breath of the Wild felt lonely without a companion. While you could summon Wolflink as one, that still required an amiibo, and in general made no sense within the story. But with Fi returning, being awoken once again within the Master Sword, Link can reunite with his first companion, and the companion that has pretty much followed him throughout every adventure he had the Master Sword in. But this time, hopefully, be able to interact with her once again. This would essentially make Fi the Pyra to Link's Rex, if that makes any sense. Hey, I mean, Link even cosplays as Rex, so don't blame me for doing that reference. Overall, there will be so much to explore going back to what predates Hyrule itself, and whether there are really any connections to them or not. With the game now evolving to a true open-air travel, the sky's the limit. Pun aside. I can't imagine how fun it will be to explore Hyrule in greater heights. Breath of the Wild in my eyes has truly perfected open world travel with how gliding far distances and climbing wherever you wanted was a possibility. And they didn't even stop there, as Master Mode had enemies with flying platforms, pretty much giving you more to do as you soared the sky covering distance. This concept actually made me wish for more platforms to explore in the sky and for it to exist in the normal playthrough. So it really does seem that Nintendo had some of these ideas with the DLC of Breath of the Wild, and how this game actually was conceived was them wanting to add more DLC for the original game. So it seems like Nintendo will finally be able to truly explore on all of that with this sequel. But what do you guys think of Link returning to the sky and what it may give to this sequel? Please let me know in the comments below, and please leave a like to help support the video. I would really appreciate it. Anyways, as always, I've been ZeldaMaster. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.